Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq. According to the World Economic Forum, the world's richest people got over $2 trillion richer in 2020. However, our next guest says the nature of wealth is changing and it's no longer about bankrolls. Ramich, founder and CEO at Small Giants, a marketing technology firm focused on fast growth companies, is here to share new ways to view money and power. It's great to have you with us. Welcome to Trade Talks.
Thank you for having me, Jill.
During the last 18 months, there's no doubt that the rich get richer, but you contend that we should not just focus on the bottom line. Tell us more about your new index and how this helps us understand the marketplace.
Yeah, that's correct, Jill. So if you look at over the last 18 months, the trend is that according to UBS, that the richest people in the world the billionaires in the world have gained over 27% in wealth. Now that's astonishing amount of money. But ultimately what we are trying to measure is that, whether it's purely wealth that has the primary impact on what moves markets. Based on the data that we have collected and research that we have done, ultimately, as the world is changing, as the technology and the internet is evolving, the power of influence is as important as the wealth of individual. And there are endless examples of that where ultimately, one misguided tweet can move the market as much as an acquisition or a merger announcement.
Why is this intel important to market observers?
So ultimately to actually understanding who are the people that can move the markets is incredibly valuable from the financial and marketing, which is obviously where we're coming from perspective. So ability to measure the proportion of influence someone gets through wealth, the wealth that they get through the entities that they control, but also the influence that they have within a company or an entity that they control, and as well as influence in the purest form, which is, from marketing perspective, it's, the number of followers they have and the size of the networks that are within such spaces. So to actually have the ability to understand who are those people that can move the markets is absolutely invaluable information to have. And so far, if you look at the marketplace, there are many lists which are purely based on the wealth, the personal wealth that someone has. But ultimately, what we are looking to do with our index is to understand, where does power actually lie? Is it purely in the personal wealth? Is it the wealth that someone has control over the entities they control in a political sense or economical sense, from business perspective? Or is the influence actually in some sense more important in terms of the ability to move the market? So ultimately what we want to measure is, what is the power level of an individual and ability to move the market? And obviously that information is incredibly valuable to the marketplace.
Right, so we're essentially looking at this trend of the power of influence. How do you see this developing over the next few years?
So based on what I already said, what we are seeing is that the money is not the pure and the only data point that you need to understand in terms of ability for an individual to move the market. Not just by itself. Obviously, wealth and money are incredibly important, but there is a lot more, and that's very quickly evolving over time. So the two crucial parts that we have come through our research in ability to understand where power lies with individual. Ultimately, one of them is the size of the network is incredibly important that someone controls, and by size of the network, size of the amount of people within that network is ultimately what we're measuring. So if you take China or India that have 1.5 billion people. So those are networks of people, and ultimately, people that control governments in those countries will have control over, population of 1.5 billion. But what we are actually seeing is that, the largest networks in the world are not, countries and states anymore. The largest networks are actually networks that are controlled by large tech companies. And if you look, the largest people network in the world by far is Google at the moment. So on a daily basis, Google, through Google search and YouTube, they get over 7 billion people using their product. And ultimately, people or entities that control such vast networks are the people that have huge amounts of power. And then the other crucial factor that we have concluded through the research is ultimately what's really important to determine someone's power is, the position that someone holds within an entity, because entities like states or large tech companies, they have ultimate power. Now, individuals that control those entities inherit a lot of that power, but obviously within those entities, things like the equity stake or the popularity, from political sense and so on. And if you have the ability to measure the influence that someone has within that entity and the power that ultimately that entity has, is incredibly important. And if you look at the data, from large tech companies, actually very few companies are controlled by individual people that have, over 50% voting rights. A lot of large tech companies are, have minority shareholders, and very few actually have that sort of, over 50% ownership. And that swings the amount of power and control that people have. So it's ultimately the largest contributor to measuring the power that someone holds at the moment. It's the size of the network, and it's the entities that control those networks and individual, and the level of control that they have within those entities. And we measure over 80 different data points across influence, power, and wealth. But those are two main, things that contribute to someone actually being in the top 10 of the index that we have built.
All right. Appreciate the insight, Al. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.
Thank you very much.